All right. Can y'all hear me? All right. Just real quick, I don't know if we really need a mic, but it is helping. There are a few folks who are going to be watching us on our live stream. So if you want to capture any of this later on, it'll be hosted on Harbor Church's website or YouTube page. So I'll make sure I send that out afterwards. Real quick, if you want to get online, I thought I had this up here, but I guess I don't. You want to look for Harbor Guest, and the password is Lighthouse. That's it. And gosh, there was something else I was going to say. Oh, just a reminder, there is coffee in the gathering room over there on the right, so feel free to grab some as you go along, and there you go.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Derek. I resemble that remark. Hey, great to have you guys here. I'm Dean Faulkner, for those of you who haven't met me. I am the pastor at South Charlotte Pres in Central Carolina. I also get to be part of a leadership team to help put these together every quarter. And we really love to do this, and I'll tell you why in just a few minutes. But we think this is important to help kingdom efforts. More than ever, you've got to think about how you can do mission not only as an individual, not only as a church, but even as churches and even presbyteries working together so that the gospel can get out, because it is too hard to do it by yourself. Okay? So all that said, here's what we're going to do today, real quick. Let me get my glasses so I can read. We're going to have a time of prayer together. Then we're going to have a talk on team planning and the next generation. Oh, bro, I just lost it. What happened? There we go. That's what I'm talking about. All right. And then we aren't going to take breaks. You don't want to sit there forever and listen, but you are going to get to interact. Whenever we do talks here at the collective, we only talk for 15, 20 minutes, and then it's your time to talk, and we discuss things. It's more of a mutual learning time, so that'll be coming. We'll also get to later on see one of our planners in Piedmont Triad Presbytery. Jacob Morrison's going to speak, and we're excited about that. And then after me and Jacob, there'll be Zach Groff, who's talking about replanting, which has got to be the way of the future for many of our churches. On here.
I'm trying to get this.
Are you doing something?
I'm trying to.
You want me to get out of the way?
No,
or?
you keep going.
Okay. All right. We'll finish up with a brief word from our fearless leader in the denomination, Chris Vogel, wherever he is, and there he is right there. He'll finish, and then after that, we'll actually go and hang out at Barcelona Burger. That's kind of our practice, is spend a little time together. So let's talk a little bit about just the collective itself. For those of you who are here for the first time, and who is here for the first time? Any kind of got any hands raised? Who's here for the first time? Okay, glad you guys are here. Let me tell you a little bit about what the collective does for Christ and His church. Our mission statement is that Carolina's Collective exists to cultivate PCA church planners and leaders with connections, development, and encouragement. And we're doing this with supportive relationships, kingdom prayer, equipping mission, resourcing the church, and leadership development. I hope you'll get a little bit of a taste of that today as we're gathered together in each one of these areas of mission. We're also going somewhere, and we've set this as a recent goal for our collective as we get more connected as churches and presbyteries. Our long-term hope is that the Carolinas Collective support PCA churches and presbyteries in North and South Carolina to grow by 128 churches by 2033. Yeah, that seems like a lot. So we're aiming high in some measure because we did the numbers. This is actually from real data that we thought it's reasonable to shoot for this over these next, what would that be, 9 years or so. So 8 years, I guess, now at 2025. So we are aiming for 2033 because Mission North America came up with this plan for roughly 1,000 churches over 10 years. Yes? And I will speak for Central Carolina. We've made it a goal to plant 20 churches in 10 years. So we're off and running with that. You'll even might even meet some of our church planters who are here today with us as they're getting started. Now, what I want to do now is take a little time and actually break into groups, or actually before we break into groups, give a little quick report about what God's doing in our churches and presbyteries. So let's celebrate for a few minutes. Like, what is Jesus doing now in your churches? What is Jesus doing now in your presbyteries with plants, let's say over the last 6 months or so, or even church planters you're calling? So floor is open. What's God doing in your presbytery or churches? So we can celebrate in a few moments in prayer together about that. Yes. Okay. Okay, excellent. That's a great thing to praise God for. And asking for help, what a concept. Beautiful, love it, love it. Yes, what's going on in Calvary? Mhm. Largely led by downtown Presbyterian Church in Mooresville, Calvary has had more of an interest growing by church planting. And this year we have 3 emerging church plants, one out of downtown, one out of Grace and Peace, and an organic group made up mostly of members of Clemson Pres. And I couldn't know my name today because the daughter church of Clemson, or if they're going to ask for it in a second. Should know that hopefully today or tomorrow. And Mr. Rose got buckets over here to tell you more about it, has a church planting residency program they've launched. I'm very excited about it as an A chairman, and I know Scott's doing great work with that. And that might end up being in Presbyterian plant or a man that we help get out somewhere else in the Carolinas or the PGA. So these are exciting things for us. We have other emerging possibilities to that plan. That's fun. You want to add to that, Scott, what's going on at Mitchell Road, what you guys are doing? Exciting, exciting. Yes, what else is going on? Yes, Derek. Yeah, that is momentum. That's beautiful. Good news. Others? OJT, on-the-job training, right? Yeah, that's right. Yes, indeed. Glad you're here, Zach. We love you and have a wonderful plan for your life. You know that, right? Yeah, yeah. get around enough church planners and church planting leaders, you're going to get that. So, speaking of which, we also have a couple of church planners here from Central Carolina. Not only is Michael working out of my church along with Fellowship Presbytery, but we've got Greg Salazar, who's just started on the field, came on the field a few months ago with his family. He'll be planting in Myers Park, a high-rent district in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we're excited he's going to be here. And then, Lord willing, we hope Trent Thomas, who's here today, will be a part of planting a church somewhere south of, we'll put it that way, somewhere south of Christ Covenant Church in Matthews, and we're really excited about that as well. So we're on our way to planting 20 churches in 10 years. We'll see what the Lord does in the process. So, but any other additions to that besides Presbytery or church-wide? All right, well then that's great. Here's what we do now. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to Kingdom Prayer. And here's, if you haven't already, briefly get to know each other with names. I want you to pray for the next 15, 20 minutes around what's praiseworthy going on, some of the things we brought up here, or what's challenging in your missional efforts as a presbytery, or in some cases, for some of you as planners, it might be your own needs. Like, what do you guys need as planners right now? And then pray for each other after you get real quick, short reports on that, and pray for particularly church planners and wives by name. That is going to be a really key part of our future, as you're going to hear about later. Also, pray for the Lord to one person at least pray for the Lord to raise up the next generation of planners, just like Matthew 9 prayers, because, as we'll talk about shortly, that is the gate for planting churches in the PCA, in every denomination for that matter. So, let's go to the Lord with prayer and go for about 20 minutes here and in prayer. Father, we thank you for this time and pray that you'd hear our prayers. You're a prayer-listening God. There is no one like you, and we need you to listen, especially when we're following you in mission. In Christ's name, amen. All right, guys, what we're going to do next is we're going to talk a little bit about a subject. We're going to talk about team planting in the next generation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably talk for 15, 20-ish minutes here, and then you guys get to talk for a little while. We'll interact, questions, protests, feedback, thoughts, the whole 9 yards. So we're going to just dive right in right here. And I want to kind of give you 3 big problems that we're running into in the PCA. And these are the problems that are very real and present issues. The first is this: we're finding that called and trained church planters with their wives has always been the number one gate in planting. What do I mean by that? We've got, in the end, money and locations and churches that are interested in planting, even presbyteries, but the big problem is always finding people. You just do not know how many calls I get, how many texts I get at RTS Charlotte saying, hey, have you got some young guys coming up as the next generation of church planters? And it's a lot. And Chris Vogel right there, he gets plenty of calls too on a very regular basis. Hey, can you help us find a church planter? And the answer is more often than not, I haven't got anybody right now for you because there just aren't a lot out there. After he stops laughing. What's making it more intriguing right now in these days is Gen Y and Z, that's age, 20 to 40 somethings, are more reticent to plant than prior generations. We are running into this in a big way. And we're seeing the effects of that, kind of measurable effects of that, with our assessment centers, where we've struggled with lower numbers in the last 5 years or so. And we're working on that together as M&A and as with national presbyteries and churches, but it's still a bit of a challenge having a pipeline that is feeding our assessment centers and the next generation of planners. So the question would be, with this younger generation dynamic and with also less interest, it seems, what's keeping the younger generations back? That's a question I want to kind of wrestle with a little bit today. So I'd like to suggest one angle to come at this, and you guys are not looking at this, are you? How about that? Why is this not working? Okay.
Let's see what I can do. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I was trying to mess with it before.
Gen Y and Gen Z are more reticent than prior generations to enter the church plan. I'm generalizing, of course, but it is a real issue.
It's an issue in corporate America and in the military, not just pastoring churches.
That's right.
It's a larger cultural issue of leadership.
Yep.
It's the fear of being ignored.
While we wait for technology, one angle of this is my friend Robert Kim, who's over at Covenant Center doing similar than I do at RTS Charlotte. He and I talked about this. We really had this conversation on a national level that the younger generations really are reticent to engage kingly gifts versus, say, priestly or even prophetic gifts. And so leading is a bit of a challenge in terms of generational default. And how are we doing?
Getting there. Sorry.
Okay. I'm trying to remember all this stuff.
Yep. Great Recession, then you get into COVID,
Yep.
and like that's all that was thrown out. And so, and then kind of the hyper-transparency, cultural dynamic that starts to come in from now 20-20-year-olds up.
Well,
Sudden dramatic effect on how.
Yeah, imagine if you grew up with all of that. How what these younger people have grown up with. And so that's part of the dynamic. So what were you going to say? Real brief.
Got your stuff now.
I'll
I'm
take
one of those younger people, I'm 35, I grew up, I was in sixth grade, fifth class, when that happened. And my understanding is the generations before us, my parents' generation, and all that, we Gen X, we were being trained to be productive citizens in a society. The mantra we heard in public school classes anyway was critical thinking, critical thinking. Critical thinking is very important, but it's not really necessarily dovetails into leadership. It dovetails into prophetic stuff, like calling out wrong,
Yeah.
being an activist.
Yep.
In terms of leading, that's what the productive citizen model
Hmm.
really was not pressed on us in any meaningful sense that I remember.
Okay. Well, I would like to bounce off these great observations you guys have already given and talk about, probably from a different angle, the problem of community with younger generations. From Gen X to Gen Z, community and doing things together has become increasingly more important with every generation. So much so that I would suggest to you they don't want to be alone when they plant. They don't want to be alone when they do life in general. Now, I'm not saying our generations like being alone, but I'm saying we had more of an independent spirit of take the hill, boys. They are a very different dynamic. They don't want to be alone. So I'd like to suggest to you that if this is true, if my thesis is true about the younger generation, we need to talk about more doing planting through community-based planning or team planning. And what I mean by team planning would be with multiple planters, with daughter churches, and with larger sent teams that could even be sent by multiple churches in a presbytery. And I have to ask, where exactly have we seen community or team planting? Well, Jesus sent out the 12 and then the 72 in twos. In fact, the apostles, are listed in pairs. Have you ever noticed that when you look at the list of the apostles, they're listed in pairs that go together? The 12 apostles and the 120 planted a big old church in Jerusalem. Jesus used them through the power of the Holy Spirit on Pentecost Sunday to plant that big church. And here's the key. Our old hero in the Reformed faith, Paul and Barnabas and Mark and others went on that first missionary trip. In fact, Paul planted all of his churches with teams. He never planted a church without a team. Okay, that's radical stuff I just said. He never planted. And so I have to compare that a little bit to the PCA way. PCA way would be like this. The singular planter and his family go out and plant. This is not wrong, but it can be incredibly lonely. Number two, funds and maybe people often go with the plant while a clock is ticking. Our old way is here's people, here's some money and maybe some people. You got 3 years. Put a church together. That's pressure. And then the third thing I'd highlight is post-Christianity is increasingly encroaching on our culture, on our communities, and is creating a resistance to the gospel. So it's taking longer to gather people and reach them with the gospel. It's more challenging. And then fourth, we often have historically platform superstars and heroic planners. And of course, that reinforces the few good men profile, right? That only a few superstars can really do this. And then finally, failed planters, and we'll even say epic failure planters and planning leaders, have gone down in a very public way, and it's just very discouraging. All you have to say to my young guys in my seminary classes is Mark Driscoll. That's all you have to say, and just immediately, this thing goes on in them, So that's a dynamic. Now, my question would be, if you are more risk-averse generation, how would you feel about planting under these conditions? How would you feel? Now, the first response for me was, because I come from the cowboy generation of church planting, because I planted 2 churches, would be, well, they just need to buck up and grow up. That's a common response, right? But I'm thinking, don't be so quick to jump there. Don't be so quick. Let me give you an example. I've planted 2 churches. My first church plant was out of Christ Covenant, a daughter church. It's called Church of the Redeemer in Monroe, North Carolina. And I planted that church with 175 people at our first service, and it only went up from there. When I left 15 years later, it was about 500 people. I have to admit to you, while I had all kinds of people and financial resources, it was exhausting from day one, because I was pastoring InstaChurch, and I was catching up for the next 15 years, and it never stopped. That's why I burned out at the end. My second church is South Charlotte Pres, another daughter church out of Uptown Church. We gathered about 50, 60 people to plant in Ballantyne, and we're only about 130 people now after 7 years. It's gone slow growth, but here's what I'll tell you. I planted with a second guy, Josh Creason, because Uptown's model was to plant in pairs. Well, that came in pretty handy because my wife got cancer 8 months into this church plant at South Charlotte. Breast cancer, and we went through the whole 9 yards, chemo, radiation, and surgery over the next 10 months. I pastored, I preached, I did what I could, but I was not an effective church planter in that season of life, if you're doing it by measurable ways. But thanks be to God for Josh Creason, my right-hand guy, who did his best and helped cover a lot of stuff for us. And the Lord took care of us through that, through COVID, through a whole host of things that some of you know about if you've been in the church planting business, especially the last 5-10 years. I would tell you right now that I am way healthier as a person, as a planner, after planting with a 2-man plant than in a 1-man plant with all those resources. I am way healthier. Now, part of that is I've learned the hard way after that first plant. But we did learn something in Central Carolina through the years. We did a study some years back. Tom Hawks and I did a study of our plants through about, at that point it was about 25 years of plants or 20 years of plants. We did a study, and we found out, and I added to that study recently and kept it, have increased the numbers. We've planted about 35 churches in 25 years. 20% of them have failed, meaning after 5 years they either didn't exist or were declining or about to die. We measured relative health of the church plants after 5 years, and you know what we found? The churches that planted with more than one pastor or with a daughter, a dynamic, usually ended up being healthier in the long run. Scratch plants and ethnic plants were really, really hard. So that's what we learned. That's not to say that scratch plants haven't gone really well. It's not to say that that even daughter churches haven't struggled. It is to say there is a pattern. That team planting actually helps the whole of the church to be healthy after so many years. What are the benefits of team planting? Deep support. When I say deep support, you ever heard deep work, things like deep this, deep that? This is deep support. One, it's clearly biblical. I made a case for that. Two, it's built-in redundancy and support. 3, it does address to some real degree loneliness, spiritual warfare issues, and you have someone to help carry the load. 4, it makes small town planting more attractive, and we want to do more small town planting. It makes it more attractive when you send multiple people. And 5th, younger generations lean in with the vision of team planting. When I talk about, hey guys, you can plant a church, or I even watch guys come in from around the nation say, you can plant a church with us, We'll give you money and people. They just kind of go, yeah, yeah, yeah. But when you say, and you can do it with a friend who you get along with and it works well together, they lean in. They lean in because they don't want to be alone. So, what are the cautions of team planning? Usually when I bring this up, people go, oh, I got these questions. What about this? Doesn't it cost too much? Number one question, particularly of Presbyterians, because we care about paying for these things, right? But don't forget, we have 2 planters raising money, at least. And if you're doing a daughter church, that adds a whole different dimension of internal finances you can start out with. What about the multi-planter model? It seems to take away a planter from another place. I mean, why would I send 2 planters when I could just break them up, put one here and one there? And here's my question for you. Are you about numbers or health in your planters and your churches? What are you about? And third, what if the planters don't get along? It is true. Chemistry matters. That is absolutely true, which means we've got to do some homework on, are these guys going to have a good long-term trajectory? If you're familiar with a disc inventory, you don't put 2 high Ds together, you know, that kind of problem. So, my thought, and we're going to open up the floor after I say these things, is here's what you can do next in light of this idea of team planning. One, whatever the case, whatever you think about it, pray for more planners and start looking for them among your young people, your assistant pastors, your ruling elders. If you're going to look anywhere, look in your own ranks, because you've got some planners hanging out in your presbytery, in your churches, and you may not see it quite yet. Start praying for them. Second, pray about sending daughter churches with 1 or 2 planners out of your church. And I say 1 in the sense, if you can send a daughter church with 40 people and a planner, that's a good start. That gives them, they're not as alone that way. And then third, as a presbytery, pray about sending a team of planners plus outreach lay people to strategic parts of your presbytery. Like, how can you guys as presbyteries work together, sending out people from your churches led by a planner or multiple planners? And the final thing I'd tell you is don't set up the next generation for loneliness. Don't do it. I'm telling you, if you say, hey, I'll give you money and people, they'll go, yeah, you know what I really want? And this is what they'll tell you. Will you have my back when my marriage is struggling? Will you have my back when I feel like crap because I'm getting beat up by difficult people and well-intentioned dragons in the church? Will you love me? That's what they're asking. Why? Because they don't want to be alone. So, I've gone to preaching. Now we'll stop. What kind of questions, protests, comments? We got about 5-10 minutes here, actually. We can do it. Yes, Stephen. Yes, the answer is yes. I didn't get into the back. In some ways, I'm trying to get the front end of when we're luring the next generation in, if you will, and kind of calling them in, calling out the call, and trying to get through the whole loneliness thing. Yes, cohorts help. But here's the thing, they also need internal support. It's got to be a both and, internal support and external support. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Yep. Yes. 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 There's a big debate even with the younger generation about this, many of the guys who do want to plant with a friend and say, we're ready to go do it, we're going to be co-planters. None of us is going to be more superior than the other. But what we've learned through the years is inevitably somebody rises to the top as the leader. And I suggest to even those guys, look, no offense, that's great, you want to do that and you want to submit to one another or something like that, but somebody needs to be the leader because it's going to happen one day. Somebody's going to want to make the decisions more than the other. That's why I'd say, like I brought up earlier, you don't want to put two high Ds or dominant profiles on a team. You don't want to put two S's leading a church plant because the two S's, they'll go, what do you think? No, what do you think? No, what do you think? No, what do you think? And they'll just go on ad infinitum. So somebody has to be the leader. And that's why the chemistry between those planters has to be a part of the dynamic of choosing who's going to plant. So you don't have to demand, I don't think it's NRBCO that we can demand that there be a leader, but I do think you have to at least have a handshake agreement who's going to be the leader, who's going to make the calls. Yes, Zach. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, they get in a fight over, yeah, exactly, yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But you've switched that role now, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which sounds like discipleship in a way, bro, because that's the way it should be, you know, is somebody leading, and if you're going to eventually move on or some dynamic change, then you hand it off, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What a concept. Yeah. What do you want to say, Derek? Mm-hmm. We use DISC because right now it's the best thing. You could probably do Working Genius, Strengths Finders, all that. If somebody's willing to do the homework of studying how do these two leadership profiles work together. I will tell you, we are working right now in Mission North America to revamp our assessment centers. So Lord willing, we can do a two-guy plants. Because right now we're not designed for two-guy plants. We don't know how to do that necessarily. So, correct. You should be the front guy, you should be the second guy, you know, and that might happen over a 6-month span where one guy goes in and then another guy goes in later, but that's roughly what you're doing, yeah. Yes? They are. They are. The answer is yes. In fact, that's why I think we've got to do cohorts, not just for church planners, but even for established church guys. So, I mean, cohorts are the thing right now. I mean, guys are naturally being drawn to them because they're lonely. They don't want, especially the younger generation, they don't want to do this by themselves. They need the feedback like, man, I'm doing this. Am I right? What's going on here? You know, that's what this generation really wants to process in community. So yes is the answer to your question. Yeah, Chris. Yes, Scott. Great question. The answer is it can be a teaching elder with non-teaching elder. Particularly if you got an elder who has the capacity to help plan a church, with the outreach, with some degree of organization maybe that takes some of the pressure off the lead guy, or a whole host of things where the leadership profile complements each other well rather than conflicts. Yes, it could be all kinds of guys. In fact, I think the long term, as I kind of think about what church planting in small towns could be like with this model, it's two guys who are working jobs bivocationally. And over time, in literally years, they're slowly getting into the community, even through their work, and they build relationships together and work as a team, but they're not alone in that process, and therefore they're able to kind of endure through all the ups and downs that they go through in those first years. So I think it could be all kinds of models of elders and leaders. The key is not being alone. That's the key. Yes? Yes. Yes. It's another version of team where it's a larger team of people, but who are much more intentional and committed. Has anybody here ever heard of Elevation Church? So Elevation was planted that way, the way you're describing, with literally like 5, 10 families who came from a certain area and landed in Charlotte and did that. And not that I'm saying you, by any stretch of imagination, need to be like Elevation, but it is instructive. That's right. Yeah, go put it down. You guys, it'll be on the internet now. Yeah, Mark. Ooh. Okay, can he hear me right now? Joe, I'm not doing anything for you, man. Okay, yep. Mark, what's your question? Yep. Yep. Yep, there's an example. I think Derek said he's done it this way. Chris. But what was your support network? That's the question I would have for you. When you planted 30 years ago, what was your support network? Okay. Uh-huh. Yep.
before you start gathering people to come here and preach, gather people who can make up what you lack. You better know where you're deficient and staff towards that. The offsite team is that largest part of it. It could be your cohort.
Yep.
It could be someone like Auxilio that will do the
Yep.
background support, all those
Yep.
things. And then industry, what have you.
Yep.
But have that in place before you really start gathering for a work in the community.
So Chris, Joe just made an argument for the church plant itself is a team. Therefore, but you have to form a team that augments your weaknesses and you work together as a crew so that you feel you're in it together rather than by yourself. Yes, Andrew. So Andrew's making a case that multi-church planter plants can have an inherent handoff system or a succession plan, and that's exactly right. It sounds a little bit like Timothy with Paul, and it's been a good thing as well. And I might add, in some cases, you might train the next church planter to go out of your church if you do a multi-planter plant. Like that guy in 5 years takes a group of people and he goes and plants elsewhere. So it can take a lot of forms at this point. Yes, Andrew. Correct. Perfect. It's beautiful. Last word, we'll go for you, and then we got to take a break. Yeah, you're here. Guys, thanks for your time, for listening. We're going to stop here, let's take a 10-minute break, hang out, get some stretch, get some, something to drink, bathroom break, and we'll be back in 10 minutes, and we'll go with our next presentation from Jacob Morrison. Okay, let's gather together. And I'm going to call Jacob Morrison up. And as we gather together, I remind you, when we do these meetings together, we're trying to lead with relationship, meaning we spend a little time just getting to know each other, hang out, pray for each other. Then we kind of get a little bit of equipping, hopefully dynamic equipping like we did just now. And our hope is that you walk away from these meetings with just one thing you can take a step forward in the mission with. That's really what we're after. You can take one thing away from this and move forward. It's a win for all of us and for Jesus' kingdom. And so now I'm going to introduce Jacob Morrison, who has been in Emmanuel and High Point, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his story and what's going on in Emmanuel.
Yeah, thanks. You know, when Dean was talking about, like, team planting, and I thought, man, I'm in trouble here. So my name's Jacob Morrison. I've been in High Point, North Carolina this is starting year 3. Before that, I was in Greenville, South Carolina for 10 years. I'm married to Lizzie, and we moved to High Point in May of 2022, and we started with a new job, new city, new house, and 6 weeks later, new baby. So we have 3 kids now. And so there was a lot going on, and the first thing my church planning coach told us to do was do nothing. And so for that first 3 months, we joined the pool, and we did nothing but get to know people. And so you might think it's a pretty sweet way to be a church planner. You do nothing. And during that time, we met a ton of people at the pool. They would always ask, eventually, what do you do? And you would tell them, and then they'd have that look on their face and recall all the terrible things they had said. And, it's always a great moment. But we decided on High Point after visiting a couple times and just falling in love with it. And we fell in love with it because it is a very unique place. It was one of the largest cities in the southeast without a Presbyterian PCA church. There's one about 15 to 20 minutes outside of downtown. Over half the population identifies as irreligious or atheist. It is a weird town. It has a furniture market, and so you have furniture industry, booming tycoons, and you have a lot of poverty. So you've got all kinds of you talk about opposites. You've got all types of opposites. And so we decided, let's plant in High Point. Our mission and vision is very much like all churches' missions and visions. We want to see people transformed by the gospel personally, which leads to being transformed as a community, as a church, which transforms the city. And so our tenants, we're faithful, we're engaged, we're serving. And Dean asked me to bring that up. That's on our website. So that's what we're about. And you might wonder, what does that look like? Well, High Point has a very high Methodist and Wesleyan and Baptist population. Like I said, there was a PCA church in the 80s that blew up spectacularly, and there hasn't been anything since. And so when we got there, people were going, what does it mean to be Presbyterian? And so when we first started in the fall of 2022 with the Bible study, we didn't really talk about that because people didn't know what that meant. We didn't have any Presbyterians in our first opening Bible study. And so we met for 6 weeks looking at the meals of Jesus. We would have a meal together, then we would break up and have a Bible study. And eventually it was my house and my next door neighbor's house where we'd have a meal, the kids stayed in my house and tore that up. The adults went to my neighbor's house, didn't tear that up. And so after 6 weeks, we got to the point where we had too many people. And they wanted to start meeting. And so the rule of thumb is you don't do that. You're not supposed to do that. And we did it. Our coaching told us to do it. So we started in January 2023 meeting at the YWCA. That is not the YMCA. The YWCA is very different, but they had a space for us. And so we started there in January 2023. We endured a summer without air conditioning as they remodeled, and yet we continued just to faithfully plod along. And after that year, we were about 50 people on a Sunday, to the point where we needed to move. We were meeting in a large large meeting area. And when I was voting in November in my local precinct, it was at an old Quaker church about a block from where the pool is. I'd never really been in it. And they had talked to the sexton, and he said, "Yeah, we got a chapel too." And my ears perked up and said, "Can I see this chapel?" And he showed me the chapel. So we met there starting in March of 2024, and we got kicked out in December. So we made 9 months in the Quaker. You know, they say Quakers are very peaceable people. Well, so we've just recently moved down the hill to the Quaker school where we are now. But it has been, God's been at work and been faithful there. When we got to the Quaker church in the chapel, we were about 50. Well, they had these awesome pews, very beautiful, classic, everything. We outgrew it. Now we're at a school, we can sit about 140. We don't have that many. We could sit 140, but we're about 70, 75 right now. That's kind of a big background about what's going on in High Point. Just want to share some highs and lows, some positives, some struggles and hurdles we have. First is that because we are a church plant and it is a scratch, literally we moved in, didn't know a soul. It allowed us to get to know the community, but also then develop our culture, our church culture, and shape it how we wanted to shape it. Where I was in Greenville, it was already established, and there was nothing that you could ever do to change that. And so it was fun to be able to establish that right from the get-go. And part of that culture is we're faithful, slow, plodding means of grace, but we're very community-driven, very gospel-focused, and you know what? People love that. One thing that COVID showed a lot of people, especially in High Point, from what we're gathering, is that people longed for community, and they were missing that. And so the people we've come in contact with, they love that we have a natural, I know organic's a buzzword, but we have an organic community. Because we have no Presbyterians, so that's a positive. Because we don't really have very many Presbyterian people in our church or have any Presbyterian background, you have a lot of things like, I remember the very first Sunday, someone came up to me and said, "Hey, when do we start chanting next?" Because we had something called a liturgy, and they thought that was totally random. And so having to talk to people, and now people love that we have a call to worship and a call to confession, a corporate confession, and we also sing too. But just getting people used to that, because they're not used to that. Leadership training has been very slow, very slow. Think about this. You really don't have very many Presbyterians, and yet you're supposed to have elders. And so in a world of Baptists and Methodists who don't really know what they think or believe about church polity or sacraments, you're supposed to have leadership out of this. And so what we're doing, we just started last week, is we're starting leadership training, and we're opening it up to anybody and everybody who wants to show up. We provide babysitting and childcare. But if you want to serve in any way, women's ministry, service, outreach, or leadership, you have to go through this. That way, everyone is understanding the mission and vision of the church while also learning our distinctives. Another thing about having a lot of people who are not from our background and frankly from the church background, you're seeing you're seeing conversions. You're seeing people come to know the Lord as if for the very first time, yet they've been in church for 20 years, which is great. But we are a church plant, and they tell you to raise a bunch of money, raise money for 3 years, and that should satisfy everything, right? Well, when you haven't gone to church really in your whole life, giving your money away seems really bizarre. And so having to educate and teach on tithing is part of our process as well. Excuse me. A couple other things, hurdles we have are, for church planners, and I know I'm experiencing this, is that you feel misunderstood at times by people in the community, but also pastors, and even in your presbytery, who look at you and go, "You're not really a real pastor." I've had that identity crisis, especially those first few months moving there before we had our Sunday morning service, going to a church and thinking, these are real pastors, I'm playing church because I don't even have a Sunday morning service. And it took me a while to get over that, but it was a very difficult thing. Loneliness is real, especially for wives, and our wives, my wives, that's that kind of church. It was a struggle at first, and we felt lonely, and then here's a hurdle when your neighbor who you are partners with because they have kids your age and they decide to jump in with you to this church plant thing, decide to leave, and you've shared your life with them after a couple of years, it hurts when they text you one day and say, hey, we're not coming, and we're not coming anymore. And you feel like the person you could trust because they're next door to you and you hang out all the time, it's like that is just gone. And so that who can I trust comes into your back of your mind, and you want to be closed off all of a sudden to everybody because you're afraid who's going to hurt me next. So I see the value of team planting there, absolutely. And then I'll end with a positive and negative, and then we can open it up. We're growing too fast, which, how is that bad? Well, we have had to move 3 times, twice. We're in our 3rd location. Shepherding, you want to talk about shepherding people? I've got 70, 75 people. How am I supposed to shepherd that many people while also grow and flourish and not drown and feel overwhelmed and feel like everything is on me? And then, because that's the 3rd problem, I don't have the bandwidth for that. I don't know if anyone has the bandwidth for that. And so it's just we're growing too fast. There you have that. But also the positives, I've learned to hold some things very loosely that I once did not. And that can be certain doctrinal positions. I'm not saying I'm a heretic or anything, but there's some things I'm just not willing to die on or engage with because I'm too busy trying to plant this church and teach people about Jesus and have them love the gospel. I'm not going to dive into some of these arguments. But also, it's allowed me to really say, hey, this is who we are in another sense. So those are my positives and my negatives. I'm going to open it up. Anyone have any questions, thoughts? Yes. Yeah, so I've joined what have I done to not wither up and die, basically, on the inside? Well, I joined a cohort. I was part of this cohort in Charlotte, Anago did, and that's how I met Dean. I got to know guys in my presbytery really well through that because we'd carpool down. A-N-A-G-O, yep. And then from that, we actually start our own little cohort that we meet once a month, and we get together, we do something physically active, we eat together, and we have an assignment that we assign, and then we read and pray together. That's been helpful. I love doing stuff, and so I always have a project going on that allows me to just disengage. We're renovating and doing an addition to our house. I'm not doing that. We're hiring someone. I'm doing part of it. So that gives me something to say, look, something has been accomplished. I can see a finished product, which is really nice when you sit at a coffee shop half your day. And then just trying to stay diet and exercise because I have this depression issue, so I take medicine for, and I know if I don't do those things, diet, exercise, medicine, it's not great. So just making sure I take care of myself has been helpful. And then you find out how lonely you are in church planning, but also it just drives you deeper into the Word of God. So, I mean, I've done a lot of time in the Psalms since in the last 2 years, more than I ever have. So, and then having a wife who's just in it with you, I feel like I can do anything as long as she's with me. So, yeah. Yep. So I said it's not time yet because, yeah, so why did I say it's not time yet when we had a decent-sized group to start Sunday morning? Because they tell you not to, and am I right, Chris? You didn't tell me that. Slower is better, yeah. And, yeah, it's like barbecue. Yeah, the group has to be ready to plant more than just ready to worship. And we had a group that, yeah, it's weird. High Point's weird. We have a handful of evangelical churches and a ton of liberal churches, and those liberal churches are imploding. The oldest, biggest Baptist church in downtown, I just did a funeral there last week. It could seat 500-600 people. They sold their building to the city last year because they dwindled to nothing. Another Baptist church next to my house they can't even afford to have a part-time pastor right now. And it's enormous. It was. Now it's nothing. And so you had a bunch of people who were hungry for the Word of God, hungry for community, and missed being in a true worship service because they weren't driving anywhere. And so they said, please, can we please start? And after months of saying no, we finally said, okay. Also, we didn't have a musician. So what are you going to do? You don't have a musician. We have musicians now, but so yeah, that was why. It felt like too much, too fast. They tell you to hold off because you don't want to jump in and burn out. And then what happens if, hey, we should do this, and you have 40 people show up, and then the next week 10 people show up? It really it would demoralize everybody. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. So the main line. So we have a cooperative. You ever heard of Cooperative Baptist? So they're dead, but they have the big buildings. The Methodist Church, the one that disaffiliated, their pastors and us are like, I mean, we're very close. They've actually, when the YW said, hey, we're doing the floors, you can't be there on Sunday, and they tell me that Friday, I called up the head pastor, and he said, what do you need? You have whatever you want. You need a space? Take this. So we have an E-Free church that's pretty big, and great relationship with them. So the main line, who are still faithful to the gospel, they really want to be partners because they see High Point the way we see it, as over half this population doesn't believe in Jesus as the Son of God and the Savior of sinners. And there's not enough good churches around here. We're for each other. And so the main line that stayed true, we actually meet together every couple months just to pray for one another. The PCUSA church, we have two in High Point. One was too conservative, and so another one broke off of that, and that one you want to talk about imploding. The pastor there, she left to start a scuba instruction school. So it's not doing well. And the other one, they had an evangelical pastor, and they fired him after 18 months. So they're without a pastor now. But the main lines that are willing to accept the gospel, we all kind of stick together because the kingdom needs it. Yeah. Okay, let me think about how to repeat the question. So is there a way we gave the mainline people something to really feel connecting to, like this is the old way things used to be, while thinking about the future, preparing for the future? I don't know if I could really, I don't know how I could answer that well. Our service has been the same this whole time. It's liturgical. I grew up in a mainline church that was liberal as could be, baptizing animals. But we had liturgy, and so we have liturgy in our church because I'm a big James K. Smith guy, all of life's liturgy and stuff like that. And I think people do connect to that. We have a few older people. We have a whole gambit of ages, but we do have older crowd that says, I really enjoy that there is liturgy here. And those younger people who have made fun of liturgy at the very beginning, now they really love it. And so I think people coming from a main line could cling to that and see that as a connection point. We're small enough that we don't really have small groups yet. We're small enough that when we hang out, it is like a small group. And every 6 weeks, we have a prayer lunch. We have a kids thing, so we don't really have a lot of programs for like small groups and stuff like that. Yep. Yeah. Yes, I think if money were no object, we could solve that problem. And so that's why, I think that's the big reason why we don't have teams is we need more people. We need more money to do teams. But I think people long for that. I think I long for that. You saying something? Okay. Yeah, I think if we could have team planting, it'd be great. But I'm hopeful that scratch planting by yourself is also still a viable option, or else I need to go find another place. It is. Yeah. And I'm thinking this was not intended to be a scratch plant. And so that's the core group kind of, I'll tell you one thing. The guy I was supposed to plant with as part of my help, he was from High Point, was a musically gifted guy. He was working at a PCA church 30 minutes away. The day I closed on my house, he comes to the house and says, by the way, I was offered a job by my mentor, and I can't say no to it. And I'm like, that's so great. I'm going to kill you, but that's so great. I intended to plant with a guy that could connect me to different people in the community and would eventually be like the musician. And he was just taken away. But I'll tell you what. Where am I going to find a musician? Now I've got too many musicians. So it's a great problem, and the Lord does provide. Yes, Derek, one more. Not Derek Radney. Thank you, guys.
All right, let me ask Zach to come forward. Zach Groff's going to come forward, and yes. Oh, okay, yeah, I was just going to tell you guys before Zach comes up that in 2021, Lifeway did a study, the Baptists did a study, a 10-year denominational study that showed that churches were closing at a far more rapid pace than churches were opening, and that's across many denominations. And I would just say to you, you right now, in light of actually Jacob talking about the mainline churches that are dying and closing, have next to nobody there, you have churches in your presbytery that are going through the same thing and who are on life support. What are we going to do about that? Well, Zach's going to tell us a little bit about what he's done and some principles learned about replanting, which we think is a key strategy for the future in multiplying churches. Not just planting, but replanting, which is a different dynamic. So Zach, tell us a little bit about that.
I'll let Michael tee it up. When I was in college at Temple University in Philadelphia, I worked landscaping in the summers for an elder at my PCUSA church. His name, surprise, right, is Doug Crosby. They're now in the EPC. Doug's a great man. And one day, we were working with this particular plant. Anybody recognize that? English ivy. And we did all kinds of landscaping projects. And we were taking it down, and he came up to me, he says, he's a very soft-spoken man, very humble man. He's like, the funny thing about this English ivy stuff is we're going to be putting it back in 2 years. I said, what are you talking about? He said, every one of my customers that has me put it in has me rip it out 2 years later, and everyone that has me rip it out has me replant it 2 years later. And that always stuck with me. This replanting idea, something that used to be there and wanting it there again. And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about replanting as a strategy. Chris Vogel and I did a podcast on my experience at Antioch, and one of the statements I shared with him is it's always sad when a church dies, but it's tragic when the community around it is still alive. So think about down in the Delta, Mississippi. Some of you have friends down there. The river literally moves over time, and communities move with the river, but then churches kind of stick around and then aren't there anymore, and that's sad, but it's not really tragic because the community's not there anymore. But when you're in a place like my little town, Cashville, South Carolina, smack dab between Greenville and Spartanburg, one of the fastest growing places in the country, it would be tragic if an old church there died, or at least an old gospel-preaching, believing church died. And that's precisely the situation that I encountered when I got towards the end of my seminary program at Greenville Seminary, and I was interning 10 minutes down the road at Woodruff Road Presbyterian Church, which couldn't accommodate all the visitors that were showing up. And I heard about little old Antioch, which had dwindled down to 4 people or 5 people, with an 80-some-year-old pastor who made a plea to the presbytery, send a group to take over. We can't handle this. And then we looked into it. So what I want to show you today from that experience now, 4.5 years later, the church has come back to life. We've truly reorganized Antioch, which I'm going to distinguish from replanting, but the principles are largely the same. We've reorganized Antioch, and I would characterize it, rightly so, as a vital, living, active church. We just ordained our first resident ruling elders back in November. That was awesome. And this year we're hoping and praying that the Lord will raise up some deacons and planning to do training for that. So things are rocking and rolling at Antioch. But what I want to show you today from this is a 3M model: mission, method, and model. Mission, method, and model. I'm going to go through mission pretty quickly. It's pretty basic stuff that will be familiar to you, scriptural principles, and some philosophy of ministry stuff. And then method will be a bit more descriptive,
and model will be almost entirely descriptive. So I'm going to give you some helpful terminology to help you raise money at the end. That should interest some of you. Any of you want to raise money? Come on, guys. All right. In the first place, the mission. What is our mission? Well, the Great Commission, Matthew 28:19, what we're told to do is to go and make disciples, to go and mathetusate, to y'all discipleize. Go and make disciples as a verb. This is an aorist active imperative, not in a punctiliar sense. It's not go and do this and then move on to something else. It's the comprehensive sense. This is your mission. This is what you as the disciples are supposed to be about. When I ascend into heaven, you're to go and make disciples wherever I send you, even to the ends of the earth. And this comports nicely with the Gospel of Matthew. Going through this very quickly, consider the Gospel of Matthew and what it is that the message of Matthew is. Matthew presents Christ's earthly ministry as a saving ministry. You shall call him Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins. Matthew 1:21, right at the very beginning. A saving ministry in fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy and scriptures, because Jesus is the son of David, son of Abraham, right there from the gate in chapter 1. And what does he do? By the time we get to chapter 3, it's crystal clear. He's coming, ushering in the kingdom of heaven. And in chapter 3 into 4, he's gathering disciples for this kingdom work that he's ushering in as he's renewing and the way I've been characterizing it in the preaching series, reforming Israel. So Jesus Christ is the saving reformer king of Israel, even remaking humanity in this revived spiritual community he has called to himself and is calling to himself even today, which we call the church. Grant me this, to summarize that Christ came with this mission, destroying the works of the devil, looked like this. In Matthew's gospel, he came to reform the covenant community, to reform it, to renew, revive, you might say replant Israel by his sin-atoning shed blood on the cross, the waters of baptism signifying cleansing and repentance, and a recovery of heart religion, of biblical heart religion in the imparting of heavenly wisdom. Some of you might have seen Jonathan Pennington's work on Jesus the Sage and Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. I think he really gets this, that Jesus is coming teaching wisdom to the heart as he's remaking and reforming Israel through his disciples and starting with them and extending outward for the spiritual well-being of his people. He's teaching in parables. He sets out to make the ignorant sons of Israel to become fruitful and wise servants in their heavenly Father's vineyard. That's all right there in this gospel account. And how does it end? With the Great Commission. So granting that this is a fair portrayal of Matthew and of Christ's mission as it's manifesting itself in Matthew's gospel, then let's cut through all the figural and the symbolic aspects of what I've just presented as I've blown through that. Practically speaking, what is he doing? In making disciples, I'd say that he's gathering to himself, making and remaking, forming and reforming, planting and replanting even, a gathered community of God worshipers, of well-instructed worshipers of God. That's really what we're doing when we're planting churches. We are planting worshiping communities all over the world to glorify God and, as I say at Antioch, enjoy him together forever. That's really what we're about. And the same is true in replanting. And we particularly see that in Matthew. So here's the mission: to go and to make disciples or worshipers, well-trained worshipers of all nations. And whether we're planting or replanting, reorganizing or revitalizing Christian churches, this is our simple Christian mission in church work, to make worshipers to the glory of God and for the good of his creatures, especially that renewed humanity bought by the precious blood of Christ, God's Son. So, how does this fit into replanting? I've already hinted a little bit at it, but this is where I want to get into the method. And staying in Matthew 28, verse 19, the method is baptize and teach. These are present active participles, but they have an imperatival force because they're governed by the finite verb, by that aorist active imperative that was just said. And I land on this exegetically, that these are participles not of attendant circumstance. This isn't what you happen to be doing as you're going along making disciples. These are actually participles of means. This is how you make disciples. And so when we talk about replanting then and having the Great Commission in mind, what I see it as methodologically is simplify what is going on in that place, at that church, as you restart it. And that's truly what Jesus is doing in Matthew's gospel. And I don't mean to be adversarial against, communities or churches that need to be replanted for whatever reason. But when Jesus comes in Matthew's gospel, his main point of conflict and difficulty is not with new people who are asking him, what do I do to be a follower of Jesus? What he's running up against are ingrained habits and things that are getting in the way of the heart of biblical discipleship. And he's trying to strip all the extra stuff out, all of the rituals. You have heard it said, but I say to you, you do it this way, but I authoritatively declare to you that this is what is really supposed to be done. And he gets down into the heart of worship as he's simplifying things. We use this phrase, Jacob just used it, ordinary means of grace, quote unquote, and sometimes we use it as a consternating tribal badge or catchphrase in the PCA. But really, we all are ordinary means of grace church planters. Because if you're in the PCA, you've gone through examinations, you know the languages and all that stuff, it's because we put such a high premium on what? Baptizing and instructing, on understanding the sacraments, understanding Christian worship by the word, and on preaching the gospel and preaching it rightly and handling the word of God rightly. And so this phrase shouldn't really be like a badge for any one group within the PCA or anything, or any one of us. Rather, it should give us something of a helpful phrase that forces us to pause, prioritize, and certainly simplify our methods, which is really what I'm getting at here when I'm talking about simplifying and replanting. In Great Commission perspective, making disciples is doing this, evangelism and teaching within the context of worship, bringing people into the church, instructing them in how to worship God, how to follow Christ, what that looks like. And I want to use this phrase, what you win them with, or what you win them to, is what you win them with. What you win them to is what you win them with. And so, yeah, I get it. We don't want to be hasty in propping up worship services that are just going to fall flat and fail, and there's a lot of wisdom in that. But at the same time, especially in replanting, where you have a physical plant, you have something that you're building on, you want to get decently and in order, you want to get back in a regular rhythm of worship where you can really bring this instruction and enchurchment into people's lives from the Word of God rightly. When I'm talking about worship, something I've come up with that I found helpful, this is a philosophy of ministry thing, so this is more descriptive rather than prescriptive per se, but I call it 4D worship: devotion, discipline, dignity, and delight. Devotion, discipline, dignity, and delight at the center of a ministry. What I mean by this is, in devotion, Christ is at the beginning, the middle, and the end of everything we do in worship. Particularly in the preaching of the word, we preach Christ. We show them Jesus, right? Christ calls us into worship. He blesses us as we go out. He's in it all. Discipline, what I mean by that is not church discipline per se, though that's probably implicated, but more the rhythms of the church and establishing those rhythms and keeping to them. And so not allowing things to be overly complicated at first, especially in a replant, but usually it looks like removing elements, not elements of worship, but removing aspects of what the church is doing in order to make it more powerful and streamlined. And then dignity, not necessarily wearing a tie. I know I'm doing that today, kind of sticking out. But dignity, I mean just that you're really communicating this is worthwhile and worthy of people's attention. You're which is why we're not hasty in propping something up. Am I right? And then delight, which is very important, is that everything we do should be characterized and marked by a sincere, vital, living joy, of joyful vitality that characterizes our fellowship, community groups, our outreach, and certainly our worship services. And so they shouldn't be a bore and a drag for who the Lord brings. And if the Lord brings 50 children and 50 adults, that delight will probably manifest itself in noisier and different ways than if the Lord brings you 10 children and 50 adults or 70 adults. This is where replanting comes in. If you've ever been involved in a replant or reorganization work, one of the most important things you need to do is sit down with any remaining internal stakeholders. So that might include church members who are going to be there after the replant or after the reorganization. It could be community members who live nearby that have ties and interest in the church for whatever reason. For us, it was we have some community members who have generations of kin that are buried in the graveyard at Old Antioch Church. It could be other people that have ties to the church. To sit down with them individually, together, whatever their circumstances are, and have a come-to-Jesus moment. Have a come-to-Jesus moment where you talk about this, which is basically, there are certain things that have been done at this church that we simply cannot do anymore if this church is going to continue. And we're going to come to Jesus and ask him, that is, open the word together and ask and inquire, what shall we do? What is it that we are supposed to do, that we ought to do as a church? I had several of those conversations, all very productive and useful. And those who don't want to have that conversation with you, that's a clear signal to them that we're going to get out of this guy's way. We're going to get out of this group's way that we've invited to come in and make sure this continues to be a church. And we had some of that too, which was sad to me. But in retrospect, it was especially sad at the time, but in retrospect, was actually very, very helpful. And I don't know if the work would have gone on without that dynamic there. And so when you have that come to Jesus moment, there's trimming, there's simplifying, there's focusing of things like the church's budget, the church's calendar, and any remaining members' investments of time in the King's program, and also of their expectations of what exactly is going to go on in the church. This is where replanting and reorganization works are very different than new plants of all kinds or of revitalization works in particular. I'll get to those terms later, but the principles are all the same in these different kinds of mission works, you might say. The conditions are different. In a replant and in a reorganization, there's this element of felt need, of necessity, of urgency, and of freedom that I think is absent, at least in some plants and certainly in revitalizations. In revitalization, what's the old joke? We'll do anything. We'll do anything except change, right? Well, you don't have that in a replant or reorganization, and I'll tell you why, but you have more of this element. Fix this. Take over. These are phrases I literally heard from people that had carried this church through mostly thin times, but some thick times over 30 years, and had finally said, we're 80 years old, we can't do it anymore. Will you fix this? Will you take over? And literally, the fix this can be quite literal when you have buildings or properties that haven't been adequately maintained or cared for. And that was pretty overwhelming to me at several points, especially with a graveyard. So in my case, we came in, we restarted an old, dead church with 11 people, all new to it. 3 families, 11 people, 5 of whom were my children. And today we're at about 89 people, and we have on average 70 in our worship services. The challenge with this fix this, or the benefit is you meet with less resistance, but the challenge is you have less help. You meet with less resistance, but you have less help than, say, in a fresh church plant where there's energy and excitement and people are kind of drawn into it. So in contrast to a revitalization work, there's almost nobody around. And in contrast to a conventional church plant, there's very little interest in restarting an old dead church, which must have died for a reason. So I interned at Woodruff Road Presbyterian Church, which has like 750 people. They have tons of people in the overflow room during their worship services now. So they're literally watching stuff on a screen happening down the hall. Not a single family from that church came over to Antioch. The pastors and the elders invited us to come and to present on a Wednesday night. We did that. A lot of encouragement. Some volunteers came to help us clean up the church, but not a single family unit actually came over to the church at any point. Part of that was I didn't want to draw anybody from Woodruff Road. I wanted to reach new families, non-PCA families, and we've done that, praise God. But also it was nobody wants to be involved in something that just died. Everyone wants to be a part of something that's growing and living. I mean, you guys know this, right? Church plants are risky enough. What about a church that actually has like, oh, it died over there. Why are we doing this? So that's what you meet with. But here's the model to try to overcome some of that. 3 Ps, prayer, presbytery, and partnership. Prayer, that's a part of our weekly rhythm, our discipline. In fact, we started with a prayer meeting before our first worship service. We do this in a midweek Wednesday night meeting, and then we started with evening worship right away, in our case, with a physical plant. And then 6 months in, we had enough people in the church that we could launch morning worship and Sunday school, so our kids would have Sunday school to go to. And when we did that, we introduced a Sunday afternoon prayer meeting leading up to evening worship for kingdom prayer, and that's just 20 to 30 minutes, but it's really, really good. And it's been a delight. It's been a delight to watch the prayer meeting grow with the worship service attendance and membership. That's been awesome. And so we have corporate worship, corporate prayer, organic and organized fellowship opportunities and times, and systematic pastoral care. Those things have combined to ensure that those who want to belong to the church in an integral way in replanting this church and reorganizing it find many complementary avenues for doing that as they mature in Christian discipleship. Presbytery, just a couple things. The temporary system of government for most replants or reorganization works will be largely be a BCO 15 or a BCO 59 commission of presbytery as a temporary system of government. It's going to be very hard to convince a larger church to be your mother church if you're replanting or reorganizing. It's not impossible. You can do it, but it's going to be very difficult. We tried, and we were told very politely, no, we're not interested in doing that. And the part of that is that church is not super, doesn't have a real vision for local church planning, and that's okay. You know, it is what it is. But so either way, it's very helpful, whether you're a daughter church or you are, and I tell this to the daughter churches in Calvary Presbyterian now as M&A chairman, to give those regular updates to presbytery so presbytery really feels a connection to the work. And we had that in Calvary, and we had a lot of very generous support from churches we didn't necessarily expect it from as we were working on breathing new life into Old Antioch. And then partnership, I've already talked about this, my partnership with Dr. Pipa earlier today, so I won't say much more about that. But I will say this, not everyone needs a partner in a replant or a reorganization. There's nothing about it that really says, oh, you need a partner more than in a scratch plant. You have the same intensity of logistical difficulties, they're just different. But for me, I wasn't even out of seminary yet. And I said, I'm not going to go and do this unless I have somebody who's mature to help me. Can I have some water?
So, and he was not going to go and do it without somebody with energy and vision for it, is what he said. Now, terminology. You all know what a church plant mission work is. Daughter church, provisional session, whatever. I don't need to talk about that. A revitalization effort is when you go into a work with some sort of mandate to turn things around, but you inherit members and some kind of leadership that's here to stay, at least in the interim. And Tim Whitmer makes a point of this when he talks about his experiences. You need a champion within that leadership cohort. If you don't have a champion who has capital with the people that are sticking around,
It's DOA for all the stereotypical reasons. We'll do whatever it takes except change. We'll do whatever it takes except get rid of the Chrismon service or the VBS or the fill in the blank. We'll do whatever it takes, but, so you need a guy, preferably a couple guys, or even ladies in the church who can sit down with those people and say, listen, I love it too, and I've always loved it, but it's got to go, and you got to let him do his thing, because we're going to die if we don't. And Tim had that in several, actually 3 now, instances that are very useful. And Harry Reeder, also in Embers to a Flame, talks about the importance of celebrating what you can and moving forward. Often also will involve denominational reaffiliation. Why I put no money there is this. It's sad, but very understandable. Nobody finances revitalization works. If you go trying to raise money for a revitalization, nobody finances it. Nobody finances it. Why? Because it looks like Amtrak. It looks like a black hole. So nobody wants to give money to it. I ran into that. A couple potential funding sources said, we love you, we want to support our friends, but we have a policy not to send money to revitalization works. And so I learned, I should have used a different word. And that's where I came up with reorganization. Actually, it would have been better to just say, we are a church plant that has been given a property. Seriously, because that's what happened in a replant or a reorg. The difference between the two is in a replant, I think typically, and Robbie Schmidberger has done this in Westchester, Pennsylvania, others have done it around, you close a church and then you start a new church with new name, new leadership, possibly a new location, even if you have some of the remaining members. One of my interns is involved in a church that had that, came out of the PCUSA and renamed itself and moved. And then a reorganization is kind of a cross between a revitalization and a replant. You keep your history, you keep your identity, the location even, but you don't have any of the remaining leadership. It's important to be very clear with potential funding sources what's going on. Benefits of reorganization. You have stakeholders in the history of the church who will support you and might even rejoin you. We've received bequests. We've received very generous gifts from people who grew up in the church, and some descendants of former members and pastors have visited and even rejoined the church. And that's been great. If we had changed our name, I don't think it would have happened. And in my last minute, 3 actions for you. Are you thinking about being a church planter? Why not learn more about replanting, reorganization, the unique opportunities and challenges that go along with these sorts of work? It's deeply rewarding, can also be super frustrating as you manage physical properties that a regular scratch planter doesn't have. Are y'all thinking about planting a new church in your presbytery? Look around at some of the dying churches in your presbytery. See if it's possible to approach those people and say, hey, we'll send a group in to replant or to reorganize or whatever. And then very third and simply, are all y'all praying for each other in your presbyteries? We're trying to do that better in Calvary, so let's get after it. Yeah, Derek. Yep. So the question is, who are we reaching? How are we reaching them? And how does the history of the church impact that? Thankfully, Antioch has never really had a big scandal in its history. Antioch has a good history. It's just not really been much of a presence in a largely rural community that has now become very, very developed. So there's a multi-billion-dollar BMW plant up the road from us with 15,000 employees. It's been there for a while. There's another multi-billion-dollar BMW plant down the road from us that's being built. They're going to have their EV batteries built there or something. And so there are thousands of new homes that have gone up and are going up within 5 miles of us. So we're there. New people are coming in. Don't have any idea who we are. Probably don't even know what Presbyterianism is. The way we're reaching them would include keeping a very up-to-date, simple website. That's key today. Jacob, I don't know if you found that, if that's how people have found you and your church plant as their churches have imploded, but for us, a lot of people have found us just online, listened to sermons, talk about us. We've gone door to door some. Some of these neighborhoods are a bit more affluent, and so it's interesting. The people aren't terribly closed to us or hostile, but it's just a lot of walking because their houses are so big. So it's not like in West Philly, I'd go knock on 60 doors in like a half hour because it's just a row home thing, but it's a lot of walking. But we've done some of that, and also just meeting people in public parks and going around town. We give little cards to all of our members, and my first adult baptism I performed at Antioch was a man married to a woman who met one of our members at a park and who struck up a friendship, and that was really rewarding. We have not received very many PCA members into our work. A few OPC families have come in, but largely it's been non-NAPARC, non-PCA people, and a good number of people have just moved into the area from other parts of the country and have some background in Reformed faith and life. But I got a bunch of folks now who were Baptist and or just unchurched, and it's really rewarding working with them. Yeah. Great question. Nick Batzig once said that if you're planting a church and you're looking at buildings, don't neglect the sometimes awkward investigation into what happened at the church that used to be here. Because if it was a recent like sex scandal or abuse scandal or something, that stigma is going to be attached to that location. Thankfully, we haven't had that at Antioch. There's a Baptist church right up the road from us where something blew up a while ago, and the pastor there now is very cool and good guy, and he was telling me how that's been a challenge to overcome in the eyes of the community. Well, I hope that was helpful, guys. Yep.
As I get stuff together, I am going to, since Chris made it all the way down here just for this, I used to do debate with my students, and in debate you can yield your time. So I'm going to try to yield as much time as I can for Chris. Real briefly, we had a, let me see, hold on. Just a second. We had a little mini retreat among some of the steering team members, and we spent, what was it, about, basically 24 hours together almost, working through just some structure to make this collective thing go beyond just merely meeting together and kind of throwing stuff together. So something that could really help you all within the collective. I'm going to go real fast through this. I would just encourage you, if you have more questions, we'll roll out some more of this as we go along, but also I'm happy to talk over beer as we get together. But basically, we want to move to a leadership structure with eventually a part-time director, but that's going to come in the next few years. Let me just highlight real briefly. We want to focus our attention particularly on these quarterly meetings, developing pipelines, cohorts and coaching for planters, and coaching for churches and presbyteries. What we're not going to be doing is mainly, we're not going to be a fundraising collective, is what we've determined. And we think that simplifies things. It matches our value that presbyteries and churches should be planting churches, not us. And also, one key value to this collective, and I think you've even seen it today, is that we have guys from very different ministry styles, perspectives, and we want to try as much as we can. I think the strength of this collective is that we're pretty diverse across the PCA. And so what this allows for us to do is to say kind of style neutral, if you will, but we can do the things that are hard for churches and presbyteries to do, which is help find cohorts, help find coaching, developing those pipelines and things like that. We also we want to move to kind of a faith model for giving. There's going to be probably some money that we're going to try to raise just for some of the administrative stuff. But we want to say very clearly that if you want to be a member of the collective, great. Give us your email. That's it. You're now a member. There's no pay to play or anything like that. We're going to try to do as much of this ministry completely free. But if you want to serve on leadership on that collective council tier, we ask a faith promise of help support the ministry somehow, some way. But membership completely free, and we think that would earn a lot of trust among the folks in our presbyteries. Okay, that's my shotgun blast. You have any questions? Like I said, there's so much more to talk about, but I'm happy to talk over beer with this and as we go along. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah, the question was, can we meet on a different day? Yeah, well, as a steering committee, we try to work on trying to figure out the best time. Yeah, Zach, you want to add to that? Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. 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 So any other? I know some of the steering guys. Anything you failed to mention? Anything like that? Awesome. I'm excited about where we're headed. I will say that we are talking with M&A about coming underneath their umbrella for some of the financial stuff and whatnot. And there's some things to figure out. So they're in discussion. So this is a soft rollout, if you will, but we're not ready for any of the structure quite yet. We're working on it. So, all right. Yep.
No, thank you. I'm so glad to be able to be here and join you. I've been wanting to come each time. Your first meeting, I got COVID, and that was about a year and a half ago, I guess it was, or so. So I was able to work out, to be able to come in. I love you so much and to be able to stay because my flight was leaving at 4:30, and I would have left already to be able to make that flight. So I changed the flight because I want to be with you. So that's great. As the church planning vitality coordinator, often the thing that I will start with is a quote from Ronald Reagan, who was often would say, "No one ever wants to hear, 'Hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help.'" And that has often been the case with M&A coming to presbyteries. I'm from M&A, I'm here to help. I want you to give us money, and I want you to give us people from your church so we can plant a church down the road from yours that's going to be better than what you can do. That's the impression, obviously, not the reality. No, what we want to remind our churches and our presbyteries, networks, is the fact that M&A provides expertise with excellence. And we do that for all the churches, presbyteries, and networks in North America. And as we do that, what do we offer? This suite of practical ministries that train, equip, assess, so that all of you in your churches, in your presbyteries, and even as a collective can be more about the process of seeing the advancement of God's kingdom. And so with that, we are really here to help. We are here to support. We keep having to remind, especially some of us who are a bit older, that M&A doesn't plant churches. There was a time many years ago where M&A would swoop in, and I shiver when I hear these stories. They would come into a presbytery, start a church plant, and then tell the presbytery they've started a church. And I'm thinking, wow, that takes chutzpah and something else. But we want to be able to provide those services. So, call on us, call me, and I'd be glad to come to any church or presbytery that I can. When people ask me where I live, they said, did you move to Atlanta? And I went, no. I love Wisconsin. The weather is perfect. The summer for 2 weeks in August are just wonderful. But no, my home, though, sometimes is in Atlanta. It's Hartfield-Jackson, Concourse B, Gate 21. But so there are a number of things that really we have. I want you to keep in mind, and I have some of the brochures down here. The church planner preparation that we're doing now is really here to help you in the whole spectrum of planting, from those that are discerning. So I just gave Zach one. Track one, what help you and your new bride, Mary Grace, show up sometime, perhaps in the fall. We'll be in Littleton, Colorado at Deer Creek. The next one that's coming up is going to be just up the road at McLean Pres, March 20th to 22nd. But for those discerning, those who have been through assessment, all the phases of the plant, and then even for churches that are wanting to think about planting, or just talking about planting, the idea of helping our planters who have particularized to begin the process of being a mother themselves, but an established church that could be 50 years old, never planted, to have the leadership, to have the pastors, session members come and to be able to think about that. We're also, as we were talking earlier, we're raising the next generation. We'll be hosting in conjunction with other committees and agencies. This is not just church planting, not just M&A, but it'll be RUF, MTW, Covenant College, Covenant Seminary, a summit. We hold these, try to do about one a year. This will be in October. This will be the Next Generation Summit. A good number of you are probably really not invited to come. Zach, you can come. It's for those who are under 45. Because we're not looking to get people, long in the tooth like me up front saying this is how we're going to reach Gen Z. We're wanting to, on a number of levels, to raise up and highlight the next generation of leaders in the PCA, because we really believe that's an important process of what we're supposed to do. The assessment, you're going to see a lot of changes taking place in assessment. We've done an assessment of assessment. We have the best assessment out there, and that means we haven't changed it in 30 years. But we're a lot older, and things need to change. It's a much longer process, if you will. In fact, what we're looking at doing and hoping to roll out soon, working with Covenant College, with CDM, and some others to create what could really be a longer pipeline, 10, 15 years in length, helping people college, but even adolescents, high school age, think through the concept of vocation and how does that fit in their connection with the local church, given the way God's gifted them, but also, is God calling them to Christian service? And particularly, for the men, is God calling you to the ordained ministry? This would be something available for your church to put on, and so we're hoping to have that ready to go in a lot of ways. The resources that are available, you've got Mission Insight. I think all of your presbyteries have access to it. If not, please talk to me. It is for an established church as well as for a plant. It's invaluable, and the cost for a presbytery really is minimal. It may mean talking to that more of the larger mothership church in your presbytery. Can you really be the major source of the funding here? Please make use of that. There are some other programs we have available that we're rolling out now. One of them is something that I want to train people in presbytery to do, but for the time being, I can come do it. There are some others that in time will be able to do it, and that's preparing a parent to plant. So come in and talk with a session, the leadership in a church, and encourage them to think about planting, but saying this is what it looks like. It could be, maybe a short retreat, maybe 3 hours on a Saturday, but get them thinking, just like parenting. There's a cost, and there's a joy, and there's a challenge, and we want churches to buy into that. Most of our churches kind of go, that'd be a cool idea, but they have no concept how to go about, unlike married couples, how about making a baby? The other thing is coming to presbyteries, to M&A committees, to help them think through what do provisional sessions look like, oversight, and what are some ways to think about it. If it's a mother-daughter, a temporary oversight, just to be thinking, how can a presbytery be involved if it's a mother-daughter and they don't have a direct involvement? Getting them thinking more and more along those lines. And then there's a new thing starting this year. So the first one would be May 21st. Doing again, the wonders of Zoom for all its benefits and challenges, an M&A mission or a presbytery mission and M&A chair or committee Zoom meeting. So every quarter, we're going to be doing just a 1-hour kind of update, Q&A, best practices, just getting M&A chairs and presbyteries somewhat together to begin to talk and to hear. Gives me a chance to say, hey, are you aware of this, this, and this? Along that line, I'm always wanting to find out who the M&A chairs are. The PCA still works off of a 3x5 card Rolodex when it comes to information keeping. So right now, I know at Calvary, we still have listed Chandler as the chair, but you are, and so I just looked at my list. I'm going, hey, I have no idea who. No, not even him. So I don't even know where that came from. Katawa, we don't have anybody listed. I know you know who it is, that's why I'm... So anyway, we're trying to gather that and get the word out. With that, I need people, the chairs, to report when you have designated a church planter. Our data gathering as a whole is, again, somewhat on punch cards and a very old system, I feel like. So I'm still looking for that. We have about 30 churches or 30 presbyteries that haven't reported yet, if they have or haven't done anything. And so part of our problem was last year we reported 12 new works in the PCA, and historically it was about 50. Part of the problem is most presbyteries never told us, and there were things started. This year we're up at about 40, and again, that's with 30 not reporting, so I don't think the 30. Yeah, what we've done is this year we've started an automated system to start that goes to the stated clerks and the M&A chairs saying, has anything new happened? Fill in the data fields, it populates the database. That worked about 25% of the time. Next one is I'm having my assistant, Summer Rojas, personally email the presbyteries and say, do you have any? It's gone up. Level 3 is maybe then I will call their phone, and level 4 is I show up on their doorstep with a baseball bat. We'll see how well that works. But yeah, so we're trying to mechanize it and not make it labor intensive, but also to make it workable. But those are some of the things just to keep in mind. I am really excited with what you're doing here. This is, I think, and just looking a little bit of what you have on that sheet, I think it's great. Having this kind of collective, it's not really a network. It is, when you're this size, doing what a lot of places in the network gets a little weird and cumbersome. And so I think you're really attacking it and moving forward well, making it not pay to play. Hey, just be part of us because you're part of the family. And I'm excited to see what the Lord will do. There is some excitement brewing here in a lot of ways. Any questions? No. But so that the honest answer, we are developing a resource hub that we're collecting that information. The one thing I'm trying to be careful of is not having a definitive, but having here are some things here are some examples that others have done, because it's not always a one size fits all. As I'm going through our old website, and there's some things on there 20 years old, and I look at it and go, That is dated. You know, like there a great document M&A did back in the 90s, I think it was, that said what church plants should and shouldn't do. So church plants should not be experimental in the context of worship. And, start simply, and once you're particularized, your session may move, and it said, such as, do not have liturgical dance. And I'm thinking, when was the last time you saw any church do liturgical dance? In the 90s, it was a thing. I mean, when I wore a tutu and waved the banners in our church, no, I never did that. But, that was still on our website, and people looked at it and go, that's not a helpful resource. So that's what we are developing that. Some of it, what I mentioned with some of the, I have some slide decks to help sessions think through these things. Some of it I want to put out there, and some of it I want to say, contact us and we'll help you think it through. Part of that is I want to also help train, it can be the M&A chairs or any key person in a presbytery, say, here's a resource, make yourself available, because the personal connection can help as well. But no, if any of you have anything you think would be helpful, like, well, do you have bylaws yet for the collective? Okay, that's what everyone's asking me. We want to start a network. Send me all the bylaws. I've got a couple of them, but not a whole lot, but that's some. Anything else? Thank you, Chris Vogel. I'll probably be around for another hour. That's all I have.
All right, we're done. Real quick, I want to thank Harbor Church and your team. Michael, is great. You guys have done a great job hosting us. Thank you so much for that. A couple events you want to highlight. We got M&A assessment coming to Charlotte, RTS. If you're not aware, and at the end of May, that's a great opportunity to send guys who you think should kick the tires and really explore it along with their wives. The Readiness Seminar happens in November at RTS Charlotte. That's a great place when you're thinking, you got guys, pastors, you've got students, you got all kind who think, oh man, I don't know that I want to dive into assessment. I'm not sure my wife's into this, but this is a great place to just explore and listen. Our next collective is April 3rd. Do we have a location yet? No. Okay. Low Country Presbytery. All right, go to Charleston, take your family. And then right after this, we're hanging out at Barcelona Burger, so join us there. We're done for the day. Thanks for your time, guys, for being very generous. You're busy guys. Have a great day, and we'll see you at Barcelona Burger.